Thank you for joining us on This Week in Turkey. I am Murat, Türsan. Tonight, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is on its second day. One thing is still vague, however. Whose side is Turkey on, and what does that mean for Turkey? We'll have doctors Habibe Özdal and Öner Günçavdı to answer those questions. The newly expanded political opposition is gearing up to release the new parliamentary system outline. Main opposition chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu continues to appeal to religious conservatives, and a chain grocer workers union emerges victorious from an 18-day strike. Our main story tonight, according to the latest reports, Russian mechanized units are approaching Kiev. As casualties mount on both sides, waves of civilians are attempting to flee the combat zones. Ukrainian President Zelensky has called a draft and urged citizens to take up arms and fight. While Russia's invasion has drawn almost universal condemnation from the international community, the newly implemented sanctions appear to have little to no effect on Russia's incursion. Meanwhile, President Erdoğan of Turkey has a vague stance on whose side Turkey is on. While President condemned Russia's military operation yesterday, he still has called for a diplomatic resolution to the fighting and hasn't made an official statement since. Given Turkey's deep economic ties to Russia and its NATO alliance, President Erdoğan appears to be taking a rather soft stance. Here's the latest on that story.
On the second day of Russia's onslaught, the Ukrainian forces are fighting to defend the capital, Kiev. Ukraine's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, has vowed to fight until the end. The Ukrainian government called upon the population to resist, stating, "We urge citizens to inform us of troop movements, to make Molotov cocktails, and neutralize the enemy." While thousands of civilians are fleeing the capital, Russian President Putin's ambitions regarding the invasion are still not clear. Regime change is on the table, with Zelensky saying that he is the target of Putin. The international community's response to the Russian invasion has been muted so far, with the US, EU, and Great Britain imposing sanctions on Russia. So far, Turkey's position on the conflict has been vague, as Russia is Turkey's chief supplier of natural gas, and Ukraine is a major trade partner. On Wednesday, prior to the invasion, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan said, "We have political, military, and economic relations with both Russia and Ukraine. We cannot give up on either," adding that NATO should also determine its definitive stance. On Thursday, President Erdoğan stated, "I hereby state that we find the military operation launched by Russia against Ukraine unacceptable and we reject it. This step is in violation of international law and is a heavy blow to the peace, tranquility, and stability of the region. We repeat our calls to resolve this conflict through diplomacy within the framework of the Minsk Agreement."
And joining me now, Medyascope regular contributors, Professor of International Relations focusing on East Europe and Russia, Dr. Habibe Özdal, and Professor of Economics from Istanbul Technical University, Dr. Öner Günçavdı. Doctors, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Özdal, let's start with you. Please give us a brief and what's been going on right now and how do we get here and what we can expect to see going forward in Ukraine and in the region in general.
Mm-hmm. Well, what we see is, apparently Russian military operation. This is not a clearly declared war. What we may very well call it as a military operation war. We have been coming to this since mid-December. However, certain analysts, including me, were believing that all these military preparations were much more to pressure Kiev government in order to negotiate even more than negotiate, to implement Minsk process, Minsk principles. But rather than that, what we have seen is now negotiations are over, Minsk protocols are over. So Putin and Russia unitarily decided to solve the problem militarily. And unfortunately, Ukraine seems a bit alone in this military confrontation with Russia. On the one hand, nothing surprising. Ukraine is not a NATO member, so that NATO has no obligations, of course. However, that confrontation between Russia and Ukraine has, of course, an aspect which includes West as well. When I say West, I'm talking about US and NATO mostly. So on the one hand, during the last 3 months, we have been raising Russian demands, calling them a very maximalist demands, which were never actually to be met by NATO. However, also, there were red lines, Russian national security issues, guarantees which were expected to be, which were raised again and again. At the end of the day now, political solution or diplomacy negotiations were unable to reach out any conclusion. So therefore, unilateral decision by Russia changed the whole situation, not only in terms of Ukraine. Yes, of course, we have to focus on Ukraine, what sort of conflict we do face and what are upcoming developments, alternative developments. However, this is more than Ukraine. This is about the future of security in Europe. And also, not only Europe, it is going to have global consequences as well. So let me start with Ukraine. What sort of solution we will see right after now is very important, very decisive, because on the one hand, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, raised that the government in Kiev is ready to negotiate, ready to talk with Russia. Probably this is about demilitarization of Ukraine, probably changing the constitution, which includes NATO membership prospect. Neutrality might be, somewhere when Russia and Ukraine may agree. However, Ukraine as a society is 40 million, and also there is a certain part of Ukraine which are in favor of European integration, not EU membership, not a NATO membership, but about the well-governance, transparency, democracy, rule of law. So even though conflict, war ends in favor of Russia, what sort of Ukraine next we will face is another story, which will stay on table, which we need to bear in mind. Regarding to the future of Europe, of course, what sort of agreements are going to exist? Because there's a very famous saying that if Russia is not included within the problem-solving process, it is always a problem-causing political actor. So, but it's going to be very hard, of course, to find out common ground, common interests once we found unilateral military action of Russia. What sort of dialogue, political dialogue, will exist is a big question mark, because right after the annexation of Crimea, actually there has been almost no political dialogue up until now. NATO-Russia Council never met since then. Diplomatic isolation, economic sanctions, those are going to be an ongoing processes. So how it's going to be possible to find a political dialogue to be, a re-establishing within the continent, that is another question mark. And let me come to global consequences, because this is a political world order which includes many, many fragilities. However, the use of force was forbidden. Of course, we have to admit that that was broken by United States unilaterally several times, by Russian Federation several times. And there is a great risk indeed, whether now this multipolar world order, which also includes illiberals or non-democratic country states as well, whether we are going to be this might is right approach more often, that brings to my mind the question whether international system is going to be more risky, unpredictable, and therefore more fragile. Talking about so much about region and global consequences, that is, of course, a war conflict right near to Turkey. So Turkey is going to be directly affected. Therefore, Turkey initiated sort of a mediator role in order to prevent such a conflict. This is because Turkey have very good relations with both parties on different bases. Turkey-Russia relations are very complicated. That includes both cooperation and confrontation, but this is leader to leader, very strong relations. But Putin and Erdoğan invested so much on that relationship. So even though very important differences exist, it's very hard for both of political leaders to ignore relations. So there is going to be a necessity to manage differences. This is a very important asset for us to understand Turkish position. Ukraine, on the other hand, being both a Black Sea coastal states, there is a need for Turkey and Ukraine to balance. Already existing military balance is in favor of Russia, especially after the annexation of Crimea. So what brought Turkey and Ukraine together, on the one hand, it's not only being coastal countries, but also necessity to work together. Plus, there has been a huge potential. So a cooperation which also includes defense industry was a critical asset. And that's indeed strengthened the dialogue, political, economic, military dialogue. Now, Turkey's position in this conflict supposed to be neutral one, but don't forget Turkey is a NATO member. So this neutrality is going to be in a way to support Ukraine territorial integrity, to criticize, not to recognize the independence of Luhansk, Donetsk regions, to criticize annexation of Crimea, never recognize it, to ally with NATO, of course, as of being a NATO member, to have responsible position there, but simultaneously to manage the hardship with Russian Federation. So this is going to need a very intensive diplomatic negotiation process with all the parties. This is the very critical position of Turkey, I believe.
Fair enough. And Dr. Özdal, while we're on the subject real quick, on the crisis, it first appeared that President Erdoğan was attempting to quell the flames through diplomacy. Now it appears that Turkey was really both sizing it the whole time. President Erdoğan has said that Turkey was not willing to give up either Ukraine or Russia as an ally and has not really taken a strong position as of yet. Now, for the future, where do the political winds blow? Do you foresee President Erdoğan taking a harder stance on whether there's, as far as supporting Ukraine or Russia goes?
This is going to be only in terms of political speech level, nothing more than that, I believe, because, I mean, looking at, what can be the very harder position of Europe or NATO. NATO may not have any position in that conflict since Ukraine is not a NATO member. All EU may do is raising the sanctions, so diplomatic isolation, economic sanctions. What Turkey may do is, most probably because Turkey will not take place within the decision-making process of EU sanctions as before, may not imply those sanctions still, and will most probably in discourse level will criticize this use of force, how international law was broken at the sector. So this critical position most probably is going to say in diplomatic level only.
I see. Dr. Habibe Özdal, thank you for your insight and thank you for being able to join us tonight. Now, let's go to Dr. Öner Günçavdı to give us the lowdown on the economic impact of the current hostilities. Dr. Günçavdı, the already very fragile Turkish economy appears to be already impacted by the incursion. The dollar was trading roughly at a 13.5 to 1 for weeks and jumped up to 14.5 shortly after the invasion and seems to be slowly stabilizing now. Oil prices are up while Istanbul Stock Exchange took a major hit yesterday morning. Doctor, what's happening in the Turkish economy today and why are we seeing such a major impact and what do you think we can expect to see going forward? Dr. Öner Günçavdı.
If you give me just a couple of minutes, all right, I'd like to express my feeling about this current conflict between two nations.
Absolutely.
Right? I'm not a person in international relations, and I'm just an ordinary. You can consider myself as an ordinary person, all right, with the views, general views about this, conflict. What I see so far from the beginning is just a lack of, trust in the world, in Europe, and particularly the lack of, trust in the European or Western institution. I think this conflict is not a basic, simple, conflict between two nations because of just two, cities within, Ukraine. This is a conflict for freedom and democracy. I think the world, including the people in Turkey, has to see this conflict as a matter of, the searching for a democracy in one nation. This is one thing, all right? And I like to express my disappointment on the European as well as the Western institution, including NATO, United States, and particularly the Germany. I don't understand their, position in this crisis, all right? They are too slow to respond, and they let the Putin to invade the whole country, all right, without any compromising, all right? This is the one thing. Another thing is that, all right, this is the extension of a problem starting in the 1991, right after the demise of the Soviet Union. I think maybe, I don't know, probably most of the people watching this TV under 40 years old are not do not remember these years. All right, the Russian was struggling with the providing the unity of the country, Russian itself. There was a huge poverty and income distribution problems, and rising inflation and so on. All right, there wasn't any institutional framework. All right, the country itself is struggling to move from the socialist economy towards the market-based economy without any institution. Of course, this lack of institution has been filled up by oligarchs, mafia. And those, mafia institution evolves to today's, position right now and ruling the whole country, supported by Vladimir Putin. I think that lack of democracy, lack of institutions create the authorities, all right, authoritarians, government in Russia, and claiming rights on the soils of other nations. Imagine, you see, in the TVs and the social media today, nobody, says, surprising. I saw the people in Chechnya, all right, gathering lots of people as soldiers and sending to them to the Ukraine. Like, I feel myself watching Star Wars, all right? Star Wars movie, collecting a different, soldiers from different, planets and moving them to the simple, small country, all right? And because of that, I congratulate the braveness of the people living in the Ukraine. They're resisting, they don't compromise, and they still, giving the speech to giving the message to the world as demanding peace and negotiation. This is just the introduction that I have to make through yourself to the people who doesn't speak in Turkish. I've been telling this, in different program, in Turkish, but it will be the opportunity for me to express myself in English. This is it. Now, let's come to economics issues, all right? Because of the settled down of the Soviet Union, or demise of Soviet Union, the Western country understood that, or they thought that, the Russia is not a threat to the Western world. And it was the end of socialist threat and Cold War. And then they started the intensive, economic relationship with the Russia. They invested a lot. They traded a lot. And also, they took a part of their institution. Imagine, you see, a former, prime minister of Germany has a positions in the Russian, companies. And I think the other countries, the leader of the other countries also has different, position in the Russian economic, institutions and the company, multinationals. All right. This is one thing to prove this strong connection between these countries. All right. The Russian economy is so much dependent, as the Chinese economy is, all right, so much dependent on the European economies as a market. Without that market, whatever they have, basically natural resources, is meaningless. All right. It's not worthy. All right. They have to sell it to the European market. All right. But also the Western Europe, including, Germany, is also dependent on the raw materials coming from Russia. Well, the situation is the same for Turkey. All right. In Turkish, trade scheme, Russia doesn't have as high position as before. And we develop our relationship with them. And 85% of wheat production or wheat importation coming from Russia, and 10% comes from, Ukraine. On the other hand, sunflower seeds, all right, another, important items that we import from Russia and Ukraine. Both countries are important. What the sunflower importations, for the sunflower importation, 70%, more than 70% comes from Russia. And the Turkish economy is so much dependent on the gas, natural gas, on the Russian economy. And other things, if you let me to tell, is the alternative energy sources like nuclear energy. While the Russian companies are building two, nuclear plantation in Turkey, all right, and that this, plantation makes the Turkish economy even more dependent on Russia. This is one thing that provides the direct link of Turkey with the Russian economy. There's another link as well, indirect links, and direct and indirect. Well, the Turkish inflation rate is the current important problem that we have at the moment. And the most important, factors that create inflation in Turkey is the energy prices and the food prices, and both are affected by this conflict between Ukraine and Russia. And after the first day of the conflict, or almost 2 days ago, all right, the barrel of the petrol was lower than $100. But now it's over $100 US. Of course, this makes the Turkish economy's life, very difficult, because the Turkey as a whole is so much dependent on the foreign currency, which we don't have at the moment. And these are the weaknesses of the Turkish economy, first of all. Another weaknesses and threat for the Turkish economy is the slowdowns of the European, economy during, because of this, economic crisis or political crisis. While for Turkish, companies, European market is the number one, export market. And therefore, that exportation is so much depending on the growth rate of these countries. Well, imagine there will be apparent, slowdown in those countries, and therefore the Turkish, exportations will suffer drastically because of that, and losing, extra, foreign currency in the medium and longer term. And lastly, the interest rate issues. While these current problems create a higher risk in the international environment, international economy, on the top of everything, all right? And the current, inflation rate in the States, but most importantly in European economies, is going to be even higher than expected. And of course, this high inflation is going to stimulate the central banks all over the world, including Europe, to take a extra measure, including the higher interest rate. And therefore, the Turkey is going to, suffer from the high borrowing costs from the Western, capital market in the medium and longer term. I think in the end, I would say that the bells are ringing, but badly ringing for the Turkish economy in the end.
That was the answer that we were afraid of. But Dr. Öner Günçavdı, thank you for your insight, and thank you for being able to join us tonight and that fiery speech that is warranted, to say the least.
Thank you very much.
Our pleasure, sir. Now, while the war in Ukraine rages on, the opposition here in Turkey is still making hopeful moves. You'll hear about the date, February 28th, come up a lot tonight, and we'll tell you why it's significant later in the show. But this week, opposition is gearing up to release a 23-page draft of the new strengthened parliamentary system proposal that they're hoping to implement once the opposition takes the government. But what's on everyone's minds right now is who is going to lead the opposition. Main opposition party chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu hints at a potential run in 2023.
The opposition leaders for the newly expanded coalition are slated to meet once more on February 28th. The opposition is expected to release the detailed outline of the strengthened parliament system on February 28th at Bilkent Hotel in Ankara, where they will hold a signing ceremony. The hotel in itself is symbolic for politics in Turkey. 20 years ago, AKP's inception was also announced at the very same hotel. In addition, both DEVA and Future parties were also launched there. The new parliament system proposal is 23 pages and took 4 months to develop. The 6 opposition leaders met for the first time back on February 12th and declared the expansion of the coalition from CHP and EA Party to also encompass Felicity, Democrat Party, Future, and DEVA Party. President Erdoğan had criticized that the new parliament system would be released on February 28th, the anniversary of the 1997 Turkish military memorandum that had dissolved the conservative ruling party and forced the resignation of Prime Minister Necmettin Erbakan. In addition, speaking to Reuters, CHP chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu gave hints as to his candidacy for the presidential ticket in the 2023 elections. Kılıçdaroğlu said, "If all 5 party leaders nominate me to be the candidate, of course I would be. It would be an honor." Continuing on the presidential candidate, Kılıçdaroğlu said, "We want the presidential candidate to have state experience and to know the state. The candidate should be impartial. When the time comes, we will sit down and discuss who the candidate will be."
And while on the subject of Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, his tour of atonement for the sins of his predecessors continue. Turkey undoubtedly has a chaotic political pedigree, to put it mildly. Everything from military coups to suppression of minorities and political groups has been plentiful in modern Turkish history. And the constituency remembers it, but Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu wants to break the cycle and earn the opposition voter bloc's trust. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is slated to meet with 28 conservative religious women on the anniversary of the February 28, 1997 Turkish military memorandum. The date definitely carries a lot of symbolism. On February 28, 1997, a military junta threw a coup without firing a single shot, forced the then conservative PM Necmettin Erbakan's resignation, and dissolved his democratically elected party. Afterwards, women wearing headscarves were persecuted wildly for their religious attire, women wearing headscarves, I should say. A 2021 Metropole survey finds that the greatest fear of religious women is losing their religious rights if a secular opposition comes back into power. But it appears that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is making an attempt to calm the tensions with that voter bloc.
CHP chair Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu has announced that he will meet with 28 veiled women on the eve of the February 28, 1997 military memorandum's anniversary. This meeting with veiled women is a part of Kılıçdaroğlu's ongoing campaign of reconciliation with religious conservatives. The meeting is expected to be closed to the public and the press. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu had made a promise to reconcile with many groups who were unjustly treated by previous administrations. Kılıçdaroğlu had promised, "We will mend the wounds that the perpetrators of February 28th opened up, and we will reconcile. We will reconcile with our young women who were forced into taking off their veils. We will reconcile with the victims of Roboski." The significance of February 28th is a deep one in contemporary Turkish culture and politics. On February 28, 1997, a military coup forced the resignation of the very conservative and religious Prime Minister, Necmettin Erbakan, and dissolved his Islamist Welfare Party. After February 28, 1997, women wearing headscarves and veils were banned from entering any university campus, denying religiously devout women a university education. Many have alleged that Istanbul University set up convincing rooms where religious women were pressured and coerced into taking off their headscarves. Many political experts argue that the political backlash from the authoritarian government caused the nearly 20-year rule of AKP, which first came to power in 2003. In a 2021 Metropole survey, polls found that religious and conservative women were fearful of CHP coming to power and reenacting headscarf bans and exacting revenge for a 20-year conservative rule. However, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu attempts to reconcile with religious conservatives and alleviate their fears.
And a victory for a striking union this week as grocery mega chain Migros warehouse workers secure significant raises and promises to rehire workforce Migros had fired for participating in the strikes. This made big news around the country as a fight for workers' rights, as well as a victory against the nation's largest chain of grocery stores. In light of major economic downturn in Turkey, workers' strikes have become commonplace. Delivery workers, warehouse workers, drivers are protesting and striking in the thousands across the country. But Migros workers finally secured a major win. Reportedly, initially refusing only an 8% raise, the workers claimed that they were having difficulty feeding their families. Migros workers finally secured a minimum of 5,200 liras, which is about 1,000 more than the minimum wage. And after 18 days, returned to work with their heads held high. Medyascope was on the scene.
Migros warehouse workers, who have been on strike for 18 days, end their protest in victory. After sitting down with the grocery chain once again, the workers earned a minimum pay of 5,125 liras, rehiring 257 workers who were previously terminated, severance pays, and improvement in work safety. The strikes first broke out when the workers refused the grocery giant's 8% pay raise, which the workers found insulting. Over 100 workers were arrested on February 18th for protesting in front of Migros owner Tuncay Özilhan's house. Upon the protests, garnering mass attention in the country, Minister of Labor and Social Security announced that an investigation into the worker complaints was being launched.
Yazıklar olsun size! Yazıklar olsun! Ters kelepçe nedir ya? Çocuğuma ekmek parası veremiyorum ya. Çocuğum sabah okula gidecek. Bir poğaça bir simit parası veremiyorum. Çok şey istedi gözüyle anladı sanki.
Habibe Özdal became one of the symbols of the workers' strife after a video of him sitting in a police van with handcuffs went viral. Özdal spoke to Medyascope and reflected on the workers' victory.
I'm happy, but also not that happy. We believed in our fight from the beginning, and we won in the end. The police arrested us. They handcuffed us. That's why I'm not so happy. I wished it hadn't come to that point. I wish they had accepted our humble demands for a little bit more money. It would have been more civil. They handcuffed me instead, and that was truly embarrassing for me.
Upon both sides reaching an agreement after the strikes, Migros Executive Board Director Öner Günçavdı explained on a television program, "Of course we would like for all workers to return to work. We would also like Gulabi to return to work as well. After all, he is a symbol now."
And with that, that's it for us in This Week in Turkey. I have been Murat, Türsan, and thank you for joining us.
Türkiye'nin sivil, bağımsız, özgür ve çoğulcu bir medya ortamına ihtiyacı var. Medyascope 20 Ağustos 2015'te bu ihtiyacı karşılamak üzere yola çıktı. Ama yolumuz uzun. Bu yolculukta bize Patreon veya YouTube'un katıl butonu üzerinden katkıda bulunabilirsiniz. Destek verin, sizinle güçlenelim.